When the Powerpuff Girls movie bombed at the box office, I've heard various different reasons, between that little boys didn't want to buy tickets to a movie that looked like it was for little girls, that it was too dark, a variety of different reasons which we have virtually no analytics for. What I'm going to do in this video is look at how it was released and its box office performance to show you all the various reasons and how the Powerpuff Girls movie bombed at the box office. The Powerpuff Girls opened to $3 million and opened at number 9 on its opening weekend. It actually opened that Wednesday before on July 3rd, made about 1.5 its first day, then a little bit the next day, and 3 million that weekend. But its major competitor, I think, was kind of almost the biggest omen that this was maybe not the greatest idea. Now, July 4th weekend, this opened July 3rd, is a big movie weekend. You can have a big blockbuster open and be huge. And no one did that better or more famously than Will Smith. And this opened against Men in Black 2. Men in Black 2, which at the same time in that weekend made about $52 million, which is like a lot of times what Powerpuff Girls movie made, and actually made $87 million in the same time frame from July 3rd to the end of that July 4th kind of weekend thing. It was actually the highest grossing July 4th to that point. So definitely like mopped the floor with them. I don't really understand why you would open the Powerpuff Girls movie against this. It's not really counter-programming. Men in Black 2 appealed to kids. I was a babysitter at the time, and I remember kids really liking Men in Black. In fact, it's one of the movies I watched more than any other movie when I did babysit, because kids loved it. In fact, like, if adults walked in, they would watch it with us. It was a big 4-quadrant hit. So releasing a film that appealed to, like, families and kids at the same time as Men in Black 2 was a really foolish idea. And especially because it was such a big thing with Will Smith and the July 4th weekend, you had to have known that this wouldn't do well. I mean, at this time he had Independence Day and Men in Black and Wild Wild West, all open in that July 4th period. And this is kind of a return to form for probably the biggest movie star at the time, but it even goes further than that. This actually gets worse. There's nothing about this that gets better. Not only did the Powerpuff Girls movie have Men in Black 2 to compete with, but which I should also note that most people hadn't seen Men in Black 2 at the time, so they didn't really know how like bad it was. This is their first time. They're like, a Men in Black 2, how could that be bad? The Powerpuff Girls movie had various other family films and animated films to compete with at the same time. Now, Lilo and Stitch, which was actually in its 3rd week of release, was still doing really well. It made about $12 million and was at 3rd place at the time, which it was holding steady from the previous weekend. If they had a choice between seeing a new Powerpuff Girls movie or catching up with Lilo and Stitch, more people chose that this weekend. In addition to that, another film that actually opened the same weekend as Powerpuff Girls and Men in Black was Like Mike, which was a film starring Lil Bow Wow and Jonathan Lipnicki and was produced by the NBA. I just like that there's a movie that was made with Lil Bow Wow and the NBA, and I didn't know it was produced by the NBA, but it actually was. It opened at number 5 with, again, $12 million. Then another family film, and one that was actually released by the same studio as the Powerpuff Girls and was at number 7 that weekend, was Scooby-Doo, the live-action Scooby-Doo movie, which made $7 million in that weekend than Powerpuff Girls had made at that point overall. Pan or Rebel Taxi or whatever made that video about how those kind of cheaper animated show to movies kind of like killed 2D animation. I like that video quite a bit, and I agree with it to a certain extent. But I think one of the things that, and this is probably the worst example of that going on this entire period, was the Hey Arnold movie came out the weekend before. So if you were sick of animated shows becoming movies, this was the weekend you were going to get sick of it. Because the Hey Arnold movie actually entered at number 6, higher than the Powerpuff Girls movie, fell off, was at 14 this weekend, made only $2 million, and still was actually in more theaters than the Powerpuff Girls movie at this point, although it was doing worse this weekend. How many people who watched, TV animation at the time had to pick between the two? Most people don't go to the movies that much and probably aren't going to get to see both. And so the idea of like having them right back to back was a terrible idea. Hey Arnold should have moved, or Powerpuff Girls should have moved. Neither of them should have been released now anyway. The glut of animated TV shows becoming movies was kind of like simmering over at this time, and particularly with this weekend. But I think when you look at the success of the two bigger successes of this kind of era was the Rugrats movie and Pokemon's first movie. And both of those entered at #1 at the box office and did way better than, just in their first weekend than these films did. The Rugrats movie making $27.3 million, actually beating another Will Smith movie, Enemy of the State. The Rugrats movie one I actually think is probably the one that makes my point the most. It was against Enemy of the State. Now, Enemy of the State is not like Men in Black 2, just because it stars Will Smith. The difference is Enemy of the State skews older. It's a political thriller. It's far more serious. It's not directly targeting kids. If you're seeing Enemy of the State, there's a very small minority of people who would actually see Enemy of the State and the Rugrats movie on the same weekend. So the idea of putting those two out on the same weekend is actually rather smart because they're not going for the same audience whatsoever. Pokemon's first movie as well actually made more than the Rugrats movie at $31 million and beat out things like Dogma, The Messenger, The Bone Collector, all these very serious kind of adult films. It didn't have to compete with, all these different, things that are going for the same kids thing. Why I'm bringing this up is dating and picking a release date is so important for a movie. And if you get the right release date, you can be #1 at the box office. You can have a huge lead with that. You can get all the promotion of being #1 at the box office. And you can pick a weekend where you're not having as much competition to give you a better lead off. Now, the Powerpuff Girls movie was out of theaters within 9 weeks. It didn't make it past Labor Day. I think it barely made it past Labor Day. Another factor that probably hurt it, and it wasn't a good weekend at all, was that according to a Box Office Mojo summary of that weekend box office, there were reports that a lot of theaters weren't playing the Powerpuff Girls movie at night, which that report states was actually angering older fans of the Powerpuff Girls. So if you were older and you wanted to see more of an evening show of the Powerpuff Girls, you probably couldn't at your local theater. This actually does happen, and I've seen this happen to animated films before in the past. Like, it made it very inconvenient, and that probably hurt fans of the Powerpuff Girls who were older who wanted to see the film. They just probably didn't because it didn't fit into their schedule or because it wasn't playing at night. And if they didn't want to see it with kids, which is your option if you want to see an animated movie later, you just frankly didn't have that. Now, another thing which is sort of interesting, I found this Newsweek article that was Kids Flicks Growing Up Fast. This was a article basically about how kids movies were not doing very well at the box office. What's interesting about this article, and it points out something that I think is probably one of the biggest reasons the Powerpuff Girls movie didn't particularly do all that well, is that virtually no kids movies were doing that well. And it almost started with the Hey Arnold movie and Powerpuff Girls. Before that, you had Lilo and Stitch and Scooby-Doo, and those were doing great. But after that, you had these big, expensive kids movies sort of like bombing and not doing as well as they were certainly used to. And I think part of that is because of what happened during the theatrical release of the Powerpuff Girls. Now, the first weekend, you have a lot of competition, but then virtually almost every weekend, you had a film competing for the same audience. The following weekend, you had Crocodile Hunter Collision Course, which actually made more in its opening weekend than the Powerpuff Girls did. Then you have Stuart Little 2 coming out the weekend right after that, which again made more than Powerpuff Girls. Then right after that, you have The Country Bears, and that's all of July. So the first month of its theatrical release, you're getting competition from family movie after family movie appealing to the same audience. It was tremendously hard for this film to make any money, even in its second, third, and fourth weekends. It constantly had competition trying to go after the same demographic. And when you look at another film that came out the same year, which was The Wild Thornberrys, that actually did all right. Comparing this to Hey Arnold and the Powerpuff Girls movie, it did a lot better. And that's because it came out during Christmas, and the Christmas box office is highly profitable. It's really hard to bomb during that period because people keep going back to the movies and keep going back to the movies. And it's more about the days between Christmas and New Year's, almost every day playing like a Saturday or Sunday. So Wild Thornberrys made about $40 million, which is more than Hey Arnold and Powerpuff Girls did combined. But I think the other thing about it is it actually made closer to what Teen Titans Go made. It actually made more than Teen Titans Go made in this country. But I think the other thing with that is Wild Thornberrys didn't have competition. It had the two towers, it had other things to deal with, but it didn't have a tremendous onslaught of animated films and kids films competing with it, so it was left alone. It didn't do tremendously, and I think the idea that there are so many of these films, I think audiences were honestly a little sick of them. Had it had a better weekend, I think it probably would have worked out for it. And if the Powerpuff Girls movie had made $40 million, we might be talking about other Cartoon Network movies. Now, certainly with Teen Titans Go, which made $29 million in domestically and then $52 worldwide, and Lego Ninjago, which made $59 million and $123 worldwide, those are movies that are based on shows that were launched on Cartoon Network. They might be licensed properties, so you're sort of not counting them, I guess. That kind of shows to me that you could theoretically do it if you had the right weekend. Lego Ninjago is, obviously it's using the Lego brand, but both of them kind of show me that there is an audience there for it, given the right weekend. And had it had that around Christmas release that Wild Thornberrys did, we might be having a different conversation. I sort of wish Cartoon Network would have looked at all the things that were going against the Powerpuff Girls movie and thought about actually maybe releasing the Ed, Edd n Eddy movie or the Regular Show movie or the Steven Universe movie, movies that have been made and made available on iTunes. I think that was kind of a mistake on their part. They kind of blamed a movie where they should have blamed a marketplace that was incredibly unfair. If you look at the merchandising of Powerpuff Girls, it was one of the biggest licensed merchandise of the late 90s and early 2000s. So I absolutely understand making a movie of it. And it's actually a fairly good movie of the movie things. Had it been given a good enough weekend and you needed to take the kids to something, and the Powerpuff Girls movie was there. Often people are blaming, I notice in box office reports, it being for little girls and so forth, and little girl movies don't do as well and everything like that. But I also think times were changing. This was also the summer of Spider-Man, and superhero movies were 4-quadrant things, as was Men in Black 2. These were not just appealing to adults and parents and teenagers, these were also appealing to kids. I mean, Men in Black had a cartoon show in the time between 1 and 2, so clearly kids knew about it, and as I said before, kids were watching Men in Black. So you're not just competing with a ton of family films, you're competing with these huge blockbusters also. So there was just honestly too much competition for a lot of this stuff. It felt like there was a new kids movie coming out almost every weekend, not to mention Spy Kids 2 also came out in August. So it was just almost impenetrable for some of these films to make. Even what they made was, frankly, it's a miracle that Powerpuff Girls made any money, and they should have trusted in a different slot. Now, I know that there are people blaming executives. Originally, there was the idea of opening it in August at some point, which I don't think would have made that much of a difference. I think it's kind of a shame that the movie bombed, but it's really more about a bad marketplace for it. It was not the right time to release the Powerpuff Girls movie. Maybe it was its time popularity-wise in terms of merchandise and the popularity of the show, and I've heard people theorize that because the show had to take a year off to make the movie, that probably hurt it. The biggest thing is if you look at the box office, it would have been incredibly hard to make anything, even if it had the highest ratings imaginable, even if, it had even more things going for it. I don't think it would have done that much better if it was going to be released in the summer of 2002. There were just too many things going against it, and Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers, who especially at that time was not very good at releasing animated films, they've gotten better since the Lego movie, but I think they really didn't understand what they were doing. And I think Hollywood in general that summer did not understand what they were doing, releasing that many family films right in a row, and didn't expect Spider-Man and Men in Black and Scooby-Doo, and Lilo and Stitch was a bit of a surprise, and then you're just being inundated with all these smaller ones. It was just too many things at once. I think Powerpuff Girls just kind of got lost in the mess of this whole entire summer, and it's a shame that Cartoon Network has used that as an excuse to not make any more movies, because it's frankly not that movie's fault. It was just not released at the right time. So this was something different. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I kind of thought it'd be a cool idea, and I thought this was a cool movie to do it with. I might do another one of these if you like it. This is sort of a pilot. If you enjoy it, let me know. Comment below what you think of my box office analysis kind of thing. I don't even have a name for this series. But it was a lot of fun to do. I think I'm going to do it again. But yeah. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.